My guest this week is Margaret Kimberly. Margaret Kimberly is the senior editor for the Black Agenda Report, and she has a new book out, coming out. It's coming out in February, correct?
February 4th, yes.
And who's the publisher?
It's published by Steerforth Press, and you can pre-order the book at steerforthpress.com.
Can you spell that?
Steerforth, Steerforth, steerforthpress.com, and there's a paperback and an ebook, and there will be an audiobook also.
Nice. Are you reading the audiobook, or is someone else reading?
I'm reading it. I recorded it.
Okay. Nice. And Black Agenda Report is just exactly spelled as it sounds. That's .org, right?
.com. blackagendareport.com.
.com. Yeah, your Black Agenda Report as a podcast especially is one of those I return to over and over because the consistency is there in terms of excellent reporting, excellent commentary. It's smart. And I picked up a lot of these talks with Douglas Lane with Zero Books.
Oh, yes. I love talking to Doug. Yes.
Yeah, he's wonderful. Well, so your book is called Prejudential. It's hard for me to say.
Prejudential. We made up the word. The publisher made up the word. Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents.
I read your book at the PDF you sent to me, and it occurred to me it's part of this, what appears to me from the way I'm experiencing it, a group of writings by scholars of color, by female scholars that are looking at policies and looking at history, looking at regional, and seeing what male scholars and white scholars, well, I guess we would be just white, missed or chose not to see, and it's shocking.
Well, it's a shock because we've been lied to so much. We have all been miseducated about American history. These presidents have been held up as heroes. We have day dedicated to presidents, President's Day. We have schools named after presidents, cities named after presidents. People speak with great reverence of the founding fathers, most of whom were slaveholders. 12 presidents were slaveholders. And those who were not did just as much to uphold the, as it was called then, the slaveocracy, the power of the slaveholding states. And slaveholding, by the way, didn't end that much sooner in, in the North as it did than it did in the South. So we just have been told a series of lies about these people, some mostly lies of omission, but that's still a lie. So if you talk about George Washington's life and you tell the story of this fable about him chopping down a cherry tree, but then admitting that he did it, if you tell that story, but you don't say that he became a slaveholder as a child at the age of 11 when his father died, he became a slaveholder. And if you don't mention that, well, then you've told a lie. If you don't talk about how, for example, the fact that the city of Washington, D.C. was built at all. There were already cities, New York, Boston, Philadelphia. Washington was inaugurated in New York, then the capital moved further south to Philadelphia, and then further south to this new city. Why are you going to build a new city on a swamp? Because they wanted a city that was located within the bounds of the states where slaveholding was the most important. So they built a new city. And this is something that, how do you tell people that they built a new city and not say why it happened? They tell you a story about Alexander Hamilton made a deal and, New York would get the money and, some story about paying off debts from the Revolutionary War. But why would you pick that place? Why would you do it at all? Why would it be necessary? So that's an example of historical omissions, that is to say lies, that have confused us all. So when you get this information, it's a shock. And when you get it for, 45 times, I write something about every president. There's not as much to say about some as about others. But so that's 45 tales of lies, corruption, and especially where Black people are concerned, omissions that hide the crimes of this country.
Right, and reading it, my experience of reading it, and basically at once, it looks like if you look at someone like Trump, and I hate to focus on him at all, but the book is about presidents, and he's an all. He doesn't really look remarkably different at all. I mean, he's an uncouth man. He's an ignorant man. He's not been qualified. He's not qualified as a candidate in the traditional sense for the office, but his values are fairly consistent with, I believe you call it the racial project country.
Yes, absolutely. Trump has no filter. Other presidents would hide, although some of them did not. I mean, in not such a distant past. Let's look at the things Ronald Reagan said. Reagan was the governor of California, but he kicked off his presidential campaign in Mississippi, in the city where civil rights workers were killed. Now, if that's not a signal, I don't know what else is. He told stories about welfare queens and a strapping buck getting steaks with his food stamp card, and Jimmy Carter making comments about keeping the ethnic purity of neighborhoods. And at the time, school busing for the purpose of integration was the hot issue, and saying he was opposed to it. So the things that Trump has said and done are in keeping with the history of presidents, what presidents have done. And that's the thing I want people to understand. It's easy to see him as an aberration. As you point out, his personality is so different from any other president. He doesn't feel the need to hide what he says. People who like him, what do they say? He says what's on his mind. Well, what they mean is he says also what's on their minds and things that they have hidden. But Black people have been in a struggle. Our first struggle in this country was a struggle for freedom itself. Then when we gained freedom from chattel slavery, our struggle was, we had a struggle to claim our rights, our human rights, our legal rights in this country, to gain legal rights when we would have them and they would be taken away. So it's a long story of betrayals, of hope. The Republican Party, lest we forget the party of Lincoln, the Republican Party was the party that Black people were loyal to for the first nearly 100 years after emancipation. And that was a constant struggle. Well, we have to have this Republican president who doesn't do what we need him to do or goes against our interests. Accepting all sorts of mistreatment because there's a lesser evil in the Republican Party, or now it's been the Democratic Party the last 50 years. So this is a recurring theme. What Trump represents is a recurring theme in our history.
Reading your book reminds me, I felt some despair reading it, with looking at how awful these people were for the most part. I mean, there are a few that rise above somewhat, at least give lip service to a better set of ethical values. But it reminded me, the scholar Gerald Horne?
Yes. Okay.
He's got a series of books, but one is called The Counter-Revolution of 1776. And this book, I'm still digesting what this means in terms of my view on the place of the United States in history and what to do about the actions of the United States government as a whole right now, what my response is to that. But he goes back and looks at original documentation about what was happening before the American Revolution, right after. And it looks like we didn't exactly have a revolution. What happened was Britain was beginning to pull away from the institution of slavery, not because of any moral, cost-benefit analysis, really. And they, the landed gentry of the colony thought that they could, through genocide and through, things that, inventions really that were coming on. I was a little bit later than the cotton gin, that they could become phenomenally wealthy, and they needed humans to work for free. So they didn't want Britain to pull out or to abandon its commitment to using people for free, enslavement. And that was really the impetus for the revolution.
Yes, he's one of my sources. I quote him in the preface, I believe it was. Yes, he's Horne is a very prolific author. I love his stuff. Not only that, the British were there. The goal of the colonists was to continue to expand as far as they could across the continent. The British prevented them from going beyond the Appalachian Mountains, from going west, from stealing more Indian land. They didn't like that. The process of ending slavery in Britain took a few decades, but they finally ended slavery because of slave revolts. The example of the Haitian slave revolts in Jamaica and in what's now Guyana, caused them to finally end the practice, but not before they gave a huge reparation to the slave holders and ended up paying. The British Treasury was still paying for it into the 21st century, by the way. That's a side note. But he's absolutely right. What's that?
Oh, I said, I didn't know they were still paying into this century.
Yes, they were. I will, if I can find it, I will send it to you. It was a little factoid on the British Treasury Department's website a couple of years ago, and they quickly took it down. But that tells you the amount of wealth that was generated by enslavement. So obviously, the people, the colonizers here in the and lest we forget, they were 13 different colonies that all became the first states. They wanted to expand as far as they wanted, and they did not want enslavement to be threatened. So, and that's where, the lies begin of what this, it was a revolution for them. They were no longer colonies of another country. They were independent and free to do what they wanted to do. It didn't change anything for our people. And one of the things, speaking of miseducation and things I was not told, the British offered freedom to those enslaved people who fought for them. And some of them ended up going to Canada. I was in Nova Scotia a couple months ago. There are some Black communities there who date their existence to that time. And again, in the War of 1812, the same thing. So yes, you are absolutely right about that. Horne is correct. And if we, when we don't speak honestly about these things, well, let's think about why these lies are told. Why nobody? During the research for this book, I said to myself, this is not top secret information. That, for example, Abraham Lincoln never gave up his hope of colonizing, that is to say, sending Black people out of the country. Never. As late as a couple of weeks before he was assassinated, he was talking about ways to get Black people out of the country. This is information accessible to anybody doing even cursory research on Abraham Lincoln. And yet it's the choice is, and let's be honest, these people are choosing to, historians have chosen to cover up for these people. We have academics, we have historians who don't see their role to tell the truth. They see their role as upholding the system. and they identify with the system, and they don't want to upset things. And you don't upset things, first of all, by covering up for the crimes. So this starts early. It starts with the what we're told about the Pilgrims. They fled religious persecution. They did not. They did not. They wanted to go and get land someplace else. That was how they first came to this country. And we are still being told, kids are still being told these lies in order to uphold the system we have.
I wonder if this, the continual lying is really what we can blame for what to me looks like a largely psychotic nation. The behavior, especially coming from Central Appalachia and the South, people seem to be psychotic. Their views have no alignment, often the social and often and now clearly political views, have no alignment, seeming alignment with evidence, and they can't be pulled away from these views. And I wonder if at the root of that madness is a set of lies like what the ones you're alluding to right now, mentioning actually more than alluding to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. First of all, most people want to be positive. They want to be positive about themselves. They want to be positive about the larger group they belong to, in this case, the nationality of being an American. And so this desire to feel good about one's country is exacerbated by false information. And so it's hard to, I don't know, we've all experienced as individuals finding out that something isn't true and being shocked or being sad. And just in our personal lives, or realize we've been fooled about something. It's always a very difficult process. For that to be seen on a larger scale, and in a country where white people, I self-identified white people, get privileges because they are white, because of this history. So asking them to admit that they do get privileges, asking them to admit that the root of these privileges are historic, go back a long way, and that the country they claim to be that they are so proud of owes its existence to theft and to genocide is a lot. So people believe in insanity because they're told this country is good. The first people, we have this big holiday, we have Thanksgiving, and people try to say that, Lincoln established it after the Civil War, and that's true. But what were we taught as kids? We were taught about the Pilgrims. That's still the iconography of this holiday of thankfulness, and it is about genocide. Period. The end. That's it. That's all. It's about genocide. And you can't pretty it up. But if you are taught from childhood that this genocide was beneficial, if you are taught that these people you are supposed to revere, if you're taught that these people the genocidaires are good people, it's hard to turn around and hear anything differently. So so these last few days, what have we been going through? The Trump administration assassinates an Iranian military leader in Iraq, also killed an Iraqi military leader, by the way. And reflexively, millions of people, even people who said they didn't like Trump, are defending him. A breach of moral law, a breach of international law, an act that puts the well-being of this country and everybody in it at risk. There's no upside here, none. But when you have been raised on lies, it's difficult to stop. So even people who say Trump is a liar and most of Trump's lies are easily provable as lies and are actually rather minor, in my opinion. But then this is a big lie. It's huge. It has huge and terrible implications. So people will defend him. People a couple days ago were talking about how terrible he was. Now they're like, well, this guy Soleimani, he was terrible. He was killing Americans, which is false. But people are primed to believe in the falsehood.
Right. And, on that note, because I still wrestle with, among other things, related to what we're talking about in general right now, I wrestle with how to get people out of that kind of madness. And I saw, this is extreme cognitive dissonance, I saw on social media where someone had reposted a screenshot from Fox News, or maybe it was from Fox News Twitter, but it said, the Iranian government, the billions on warfare and terrorism, neglects the basic needs of the citizen. And, someone had put on there,
you're going out a little. I'm sorry. The last thing you said, I couldn't hear the end of it.
Someone had commented on that post that must suck, to be part of a country that neglects citizens' basic needs, spends all of its money on warfare. And I can't believe any American could read that with a straight face.
And they said, so this person was accusing Iran of doing that.
Yeah, it was from Fox News.
Oh, I see. From Fox News. Got you. Okay. Well, yeah. Well, look at Iran. Look at who the victim is. The United States helped Britain overthrow an Iranian president, Mossadegh, in the early 50s, installed the Shah for 20 years. The Iranians have a revolution. They hold American hostages for a year. They are released because Reagan's people cut deals with the Iranians, something that's been kept from us all these years. Then the U.S. shoots down an Iranian passenger plane, kills more than 200 people, and gives a pilot, the naval officer who ordered the shoot down, gives the guy a medal at a White House ceremony. Then won't allow Iran to enrich uranium, which it has every right to do, imposes sanctions. People in Iran cannot import medicine. People, cancer patients can't get their medication to save their lives just because they live in Iran. And this is decades of theft, decades of war. Sanctions are war by other means, of creating suffering for millions of people. Then, on top of all of this, the United States murders and brags about murdering an important man in their leadership. But Americans are the aggrieved, see themselves as the aggrieved party. And even liberals, in case you have, as I was pointing out, say, well, we know Soleimani killed a lot of Americans. That is an absolute lie. Or they talk about, the Iranians are going to kill us all. No, it's Americans that have been killing Iranians for decades now. So, of course, Fox News, but, is MSNBC really far behind? Or the Democrats, a handful of people have called an assassination an assassination. And the people who do are being criticized for using the word.
Yeah, I think Ilhan Omar was one who come out and use that word in relation to the act. And I was really pleased to see that. Yeah, I'm glad too. I'm glad somebody has. But so you have a sick nation that can't accept facts, obvious facts, and we have a system where the liars are given privilege. So the corporate media, you get promoted at corporate media if you lie. If you tell the truth, you don't get to be on the op-ed page of the New York Times. Why do we have, I hope to come back another time and talk about Russiagate. Russiagate's an absolute fraud. Yeah, but people who have pointed out why it is a fraud are excluded. They're excluded from corporate media. You don't see them in the Washington Post or the New York Times. You don't see them on Meet the Press. So even if you or I suddenly were
momentarily able to tell people the truth, we would either be scorned or not believed or seen as crazy people. So the system perpetuates itself in part by perpetuating the lies that keep people in line, keep people from questioning, and keep people in support of things they should not support.
And see, that's why I think a book like yours is very important, and why I want to have you on this, because, I wonder, I despair about making any sort of social, economic, or political progress without confronting these things. It's as if, you committed a crime. You killed another child when you were 7. I mean, this is a classic movie trope, but you committed this horrible crime. You drowned your sister. And you can't admit this to yourself, and so you're stunted, and you make no sense as an integral personality. And then at some point, when you finally come apart, you break down, you're confronted with the truth of your history. And I see that in Nazi Germany, not Nazi Germany, but Germany, reflecting on the Nazi crime. They have education in the schools about what happened. They have plaques set up. They have places that commemorate, where a certain Jewish store was broken into, or where people were murdered or guillotined. And I know we have a little of that here, but I despair with trying to figure out how, we could address a moment of national honesty on this.
Well, it's funny, in Germany, it's also illegal. Nazi memorabilia is illegal. You can't have a swastika in Germany. You'll get, I think you can go to jail for it. But Americans need to stop asking, frankly. It should not be Americans who ask people to face their past when we haven't faced ours. But, it's a funny thing who we pick as the people who should be contrite. The same can be said for other European nations. The slave trade was conducted by the English, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese. One of the worst genocides in history occurred in the Congo at the hands of their King Leopold. And I believe there are only 1 or 2 books that have been written about the genocide against the Congolese. And there are the zillion books about Nazi Germany. People don't even know that this took place. What the British did in their empire. People like Winston Churchill, he's supposed to be a big hero of the war. During the war, he created a famine in India. Basically took food from Indians to give it to British military. And millions of people died. The French, what they did in their colonies after the war, they went to retake their colonies in Vietnam and in Algeria. So there's a lot of criminality, and there are a lot of guilty parties all over the world. And we need to give voice to all of the victims and start pointing out all of the criminals. And what part of the problem is, as I said, people want to be positive and want to have heroes. We need to give ourselves new heroes. We need to stop making these presidents heroes, and we need to say John Brown was a hero because he was ready to wage war. Unfortunately, failed. Well, he didn't fail because he lit the spark that caused the Civil War to take place 2 years later. And by the way, the Civil War was a good thing. It was a very good thing. I don't think chattel slavery in this country would have ended without it. So he should be one of our heroes. There was a man, I talked about the enslaved people who fought for the British. There was a man, his name was Colonel Ty. He was in New Jersey. He was a ferocious fighter against the British. He died in battle, in fact. I'd never heard of his name. I heard about Christmas addicts all the time. So I could go on and on and on. And I think we need to create a new pantheon of people, the revolutionaries who fought and often succeeded against the system. Not to just leave people bereft and say, well, what do I believe in now? Well, you can believe in the truth, and you can believe in these people who did great things for humanity. So I think that's important, but it has to start with books like this, which begin the process of, you got to pull off seems like pulling off the scab, but a new scab can form and complete the healing process.
Have you read a book called Dixie Be Damned?
No, I have not.
It's an excellent book, brought by AK Press. It was put out by, or authored by two people that write for, I forgot the magazine, but it's a magazine out of it is a Southern-based leftist publication. They did a lot of research into specific episodes in the American Southeast and looked at neglected trends, basically things that were left out, or like you said, they're obvious things. You can, they're essentially like they're overlooked. And one of the things they pointed out was the relationship between northern industrialists and nascent southern industrialists in crafting the post-Civil War legislation that led to the imprisonment, the enslavement of prisoners. That looks like as the U.S. government was going through the post-Civil War, the post-bellum period, that these industrialists had already anticipated that move and didn't want to relinquish their hold on people's lives as free labor. So you have, like, through Tennessee, there's actually a convict war where they, I need to review the details, but basically a lot of the miners in these Tennessee towns that were themselves being oppressed as wage slaves, but as this new transition, were controlled by the mine owners bringing prisoners in under the 13th Amendment and working them for free. And it's the conditions when prisoners were working under were horrible. They, a lot of them, they were trapped in the mines when the mines were dynamited because they're convicts and they have no rights. And there were actually moments in which the miners themselves that were working wages went and freed the convicts. I want to describe all types of wonderful motivations, but it could be just an economic motivation, in the class warfare there. But it looks like there was a fairly seamless transition from the supposed end of chattel slavery onto this continuation of chattel slavery under a different name and a transition to wage slavery. I don't want to equate the two because I think obviously chattel slavery is much worse, but it's still on a spectrum in terms of class use, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, these people weren't going to just give up. People
anticipated, though.
What's that?
I think they had anticipated that post-bellum moment when they could reknit their power, still try and exploit people, especially Black Americans at that time, under a different set of rules. Like it looks like it's much more managed, I thought.
Well, I'm going to admit I'm not as familiar with this, but it sounds logical to me. The Black population, to this day, most Black people still live in the South, even after the first and second great migrations of the 20th century. So after chattel slavery ended, we had the sharecropping system started. All the so-called black codes, loitering laws, that people could be the convict labor system, where people were just snatched up and forced into imprisonment for little or no reason, sometimes for years at a time. The struggle is constant. You have a victory, and the vanquished don't stay vanquished long. They figure out something else. After the the 1960s, after the liberation movement, generally called the civil rights movement, what happened? That's when mass incarceration begins. When Martin Luther King was killed, I read this last year, there were fewer than 1 million people incarcerated in total. There were like 600,000 people incarcerated in the entire country. 50 years later, there's more than 2 million. Their goal is always to manage the black population, to physically control the black population. So if slavery ends, you have to have a 13th Amendment so you can still squeeze some free labor out of people, a convict labor system, a sharecropping system. People gain legal rights through struggle. The right to vote, discrimination is outlawed. So you have to still control them. So this is, now we know. We've seen this movie. We know the ending. Every time we have a victory, they are lying in wait to minimize it or to take it away altogether. So while I'm not that familiar with it, it sounds like it makes perfect sense to me.
It was just that they laid out how it was a little more seamless, and that a lot of the industrialists on both sides of the geographic divide of the war they had already been working together. Again, it brings me to this, I want to say despair, but at the same time, I don't want to wallow in that despair, but it brings me to a despair, like you said, when you're ripping the Band-Aid off lives. At least until a decade ago, I have major criticisms of the U.S., but I also could have told a story about how enmeshed in that nightmare was a real potential, and that you had, these ideals that were there that could be utilized to address and change. And the more I read about indigenous history and books like yours and books like Horn, the less I can tell that story. In fact, I can't tell it at all now. It's like a lot of psychopaths and trying to construct a white ethno-state and make a lot of money. And that's hideous.
Well, it's difficult. I sort of know what you mean. I think we have to struggle in solidarity with other people. I think the more alone we are, the more difficult it is to see a new path. Revolutionary has to be optimistic. You can't change anything if you don't believe it can be changed. We do have an extra burden in this country because of the history we have been discussing. Even if there is some cataclysmic event, and I really believe in the absence of these truths being told, I think that that's the only way America will change, by something revolutionary. I think, because it's happened in the past, I think this racist foundation of the country will take over first. That white people will blame black people for their problems. But to change that paradigm, to have political education, and it has worked in the past. The fact that it gets crushed tells you that it was working.
Right.
But I think we have to be in alliance with other people and change what we can where we can. We're starting to see some of it, that people are actually openly talking about the failures of capitalism, that there are politicians using the word. They're not socialists. Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not a socialist. But the fact that they're talking about social democracy, the fact that this word is not taboo, the fact that enough people are suffering enough that they are willing to look at things in a new way, for people to think that they, if they went to college, they could then get a living wage job. Well, guess what? You're not guaranteed a living wage job, and you get out of college with a lot of debt. And you live in a country where people are so stupid, they actually argue against. That's another big problem in this country, because we have this dog-eat-dog society. It's hard for individuals to be in solidarity with each other. So somebody will say, well, I paid off my student loan. Why should so-and-so, be let off the hook? Well, I paid my student loans, but I don't care if other people don't have to pay theirs back. It's a good, a social good. It's a universal good if that were to happen. But the fact that you have to argue against it, that people will say, who's going to pay for that? How are you going to get free health care? Who's going to pay for it? We'll pay for it. We pay for Medicare. We pay for Medicaid. The states used to pay. I recently got the largest number of retweets and likes for anything I posted on Twitter recently. And I'm Freedom Ride Blog is my Twitter handle. And I pointed out that we had free college here in New York City. The CUNY system, City University of New York, was free until the 70s. California had, if people are correcting me and saying it wasn't free, but it was very cheap. But okay, California had a tuition-free state university system, and Reagan got rid of it. We had this stuff. We've seen it. And it's been taken away from us. It's like the frog in the boiling pot of water. I don't know if it's true or not, but we're still sitting in that pot instead of jumping out. And people don't even realize that they had this stuff. And people said, oh, yeah, thanks for reminding me. We literally have forgotten because of propaganda. But my point is that we have had this stuff. We have agitated for change. And I think that's the most important thing to remember. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, Nixon started that because there were huge protests. There were 1 million people out in the streets in the early 70s. I remember the first Earth Day in I think it was 1970. I was a kid. I'm sorry to get off on a tangent a little bit, but I just want us to have reasons for optimism and to understand how our attention has been diverted. That somebody, like, speaking of Reagan again, that he could convince people that government was bad. He tapped into a resentment that was already there, much of it racially based. But we can get it back. And I think the fact that somebody like Bernie Sanders, I'm not a Democrat anymore, by the way, I'm a Green Party member, but that for somebody to talk about bringing back a little bit of change to be attacked so ferociously means they know that people will respond to this. They know that. That's their fear. And that's why there was I think they call it the Bernie blackout, the corporate media, ignoring him and saying he's behind in the polls when he's ahead and all the lying they do. So
I've seen a lot of that. They had a poll, I know it was a headline, CNN, I believe, and it was about a poll, maybe in Iowa. I don't want to mix all this up, but I did read it and read about it. Basically, Sanders was in first place, and he had moved up. He had been in third. Warren was in second, and Buttigieg had moved up to third. And instead of saying just what they said, Sanders, Warren, Buttigieg in that order, they said Sanders loses his third place position to Buttigieg. So
yeah,
he dropped into first place. It's
yes. So they have to do that. They have to. It's like there used to be this old routine performance where somebody was spinning plates. It goes back to the 60s, watching TV as a kid, and they had to eventually keep all the plates spinning simultaneously. That's what they have to do. They've got to lie to us about everything. When somebody emerges who tells you a little bit of the truth and says, you might get back a little of what you lost, they got to keep the plate spinning. So they have to lie. And we also have to see ourselves in the international context. That's what just happened in the UK. The propaganda against Jeremy Corbyn was unprecedented. I think he made a mistake not backing Brexit, making the left case for it. But I still think they decided they couldn't give him a chance to win and remind people of the things they used to have. So this is a struggle. And I think it's important to see ourselves in international terms as well, to see the French workers, and it's not necessarily a left-wing movement, the Yellow Vests. Some of them are quite conservative, but to know that there are people who, like us, are having their benefits taken away, but unlike us, are rising up in protest. Although
Right.
these protests don't get as much attention as the protests in Hong Kong, the protesters who don't even represent most of the people.
Right. Yeah, and that's another thing too. You're talking about the Yellow Vest movement having some participants and have the conservative viewpoint. There has to be some way that we can acknowledge our history and acknowledge even our recent history, and as you said, what we've lost collectively, and yet have that kind of big tent movement. The Popular Front, like the Popular Front in the 30s included a lot of people that didn't agree with each other on many points. And I've mentioned this to people before as I've been involved with different activities. I hate to call myself an activist, but I guess that's what I've been to some extent. And when I talk with people about that, if you're organizing at a job, you're going to have people that have varying degrees of racism, of misogyny, of homophobia, a lot of ignorance about history in general. And you have to find a way to lay out a platform where something can get done progressively in a certain context without having to bring everyone onto exactly the same level and have that kind of agreement. Even the IWW, I really like the IWW, but if you go back and you actually look at the lyrics of songs from the teens of the last century, there's a lot of homophobia in those, a lot of misogyny. They've changed the lyrics or dropped some of those, but they were able to actually have a very aggressive feminist movement in the IWW while singing songs like that. And there's a lesson there that I think we need to learn, not acceptance, but a way of moving past those things and addressing them en route,
Well, I think one of the ways to do that is to coalesce around issues where everyone has an interest. So
Yeah.
I was just reading the federal minimum wage has not gone up since the 90s. And even when Democrats are in power, the first 2 years Obama was in office, lest we forget, Democrats controlled the White House and both houses of Congress. And they didn't raise the minimum wage. Minimum wage is still federal is still $7.25. Something like that is something that everyone has a stake in. And even if you're not at the minimum level, your wages would go up if there was a sustained effort to raise it. So that's something everybody likes, that everybody would have an interest in. Of course, you'll always find the idiots who act against their interests, but it's pretty clear that when there is a mobilization of people, that everyone can be on the same side. And, the issues you're raising, it has to be in the context of something real. You can't just talk suddenly about, everybody's giving their pronoun and you have to have a gender neutral restroom. In the absence of real progress for people, that's just phony to me. It's just icing on the cake. I don't know how many people needed gender neutral restrooms. Trans people were going to the bathroom. They weren't all wearing Depends or peeing in the street. But all of a sudden we were told this was the most important thing. And not that wage theft was happening, or this horrible minimum wage, or the quote unquote gig economy, which means people being insecure in the labor force. Those are the things that bring people together, and whatever other differences they have can be made secondary when there's activism about really basic issues that affect most people.
Yeah, I agree with that. And even if you have an issue that is somewhat significant, but doesn't, but has a limited scope, finding these bigger issues that can unite people is significant healthcare. I was listening to the Mountain Radio out of Kentucky, WMNT, and they were interviewing some people that supported Trump and were in danger of losing their healthcare. And you could hear the cognitive dissonance beginning to break down because, when you don't have the ability to continue to live or to eat or to have a home, the rubber meets the road. Even if you want to grasp on to this, psychotic, phony narrative we've been talking about, if you don't have enough to eat or to medicine, you give it up.
Well, and I also think it's important for us to have victories because whatever these people believe, whether they support Trump or not, if we had Medicare for all, they would use it.
Yeah, of course.
They would use it. If they could send their kids to college for free, they would do it. So I think we have to do what we can to get these victories, because when we lose, that's the beginning of. So when public education becomes more expensive, and the federal government and the states spend less money on education, it's death by 1,000 cuts. So it starts with, okay, we add free tuition here or there. Now they charge a little bit of tuition, Now the states are paying almost nothing. And these state institutions are being run like private universities and depend on rich alumni and getting out-of-state students or foreign students or all kinds of crazy schemes because the government doesn't do what it used to do. And that's what happens when we lose and lose and lose, and they take and take and take. And then we start to think that this is the way it should be or the way it's always been, or forget that about the things that we once had. So I think it's when you talk about people like that, we have to win, and they have to see themselves winning. And it's not some abstract idea that they would have health care whether they had a job or not. That they wouldn't have to pay, or they pay just a little bit, or to let them know that it can, they do this to the rest of the world. My God, it's, they're not dropping like flies in Canada. People are, they have this free system, and, people are healthy. They live longer than Americans do. But that's the other reason they lie. They don't want you to know that Cuba, despite the years of sanctions, despite the years of punishment and misery created by the United States, that Cuba trains doctors and sends them all over the world. They don't want you to know that. So they can say socialism doesn't work. Meanwhile, of course, have you ever noticed nobody ever says capitalism doesn't work, no matter how badly it fails? No matter how few people it serves, no matter what disasters it creates, but they'll ruin Venezuela's economy and then say, "See, socialism doesn't work." But that's why we have to be in solidarity with each other, and we have to take every opportunity to be truthful and to learn the truth.
Yeah, and like I said, I think you're not only correct on that, but it's works like yours, like Horn, Roseanne Dunbar, some of these things that are coming out now, these books and these other publications, articles that can disabuse people of their illusions. That helps us to see, obviously with capitalism, it's collapsing all the time, and it's a disaster. But our inability as Americans to see that is I think tethered to our root psychosis of this crazy narrative we have of our history. That makes sense.
Well, I think it's important for us to stand up. I think it's important for these Confederate monuments to come down. I think it's important for all the, and it's a funny thing. Trump, and I write about it in the book, Trump said, well, you're going to take down Jefferson's monument, Washington's monument, and the New York Times took a poll, and their readership, not Trump supporters, were opposed to removing presidential monuments. And but we have to say it anyway. We have to seize the conversation and say, No, I don't want to go to a school called Thomas Jefferson School. No, we shouldn't have slaveholder names, slaveholder monuments. We need to take their faces off the money. And I don't think it honors Harriet Tubman to put her on a bill with Andrew Jackson, I believe, one of the worst presidents. He carried out more evil than I would say than any other president. So we need to, and not be silenced by people calling you politically correct or whatever term they use to try to shut you up. It's important for us to change this and say, yes, all these monuments need to come down. There shouldn't be monuments to Confederate generals or to Thomas Jefferson or to George Washington or to international criminals like the ones I mentioned, like stop saying Winston Churchill was so wonderful. We need to do all of those things. And when you think of Belgium, you shouldn't just think of chocolates. You should think of King Leopold and his genocide. So it is very important for us to keep talking about these things, for people to get these works published. And I look forward to as many people reading as possible. As I said, the publication date's February 4th. People can read my stuff at blackagendareport.com, and I'm on Twitter, Freedom Ride Blog.
Freedom Ride Blog.
Yes.
All right, Margaret, thank you so much for taking time to talk about this. I really hope that people get a lot of eyes. It's a worthy project.
Well, thank you so much. I thank you for inviting me. I love to talk about this stuff. It's fun.
Yeah, me too. And it's it's cathartic in a way because, as I talk with other people, I won't put this online. I mean, you can consider that the talk time. But as I talk with other people, especially older people, about newer writings, such as yours, but about things like Andrew Jackson, and his treatment of the Muskogee Nation. The narrative is so embedded in and enmeshed with their personal self-evaluation, their self-worth, that they can't hear anything else. I told a guy, he's almost 80, he's very well written, and from Kentucky, and I said, read about Jackson, he's a sociopath, he's a psychotic man, was, and he said, yeah, but you have to put that along with the good thing.
Good for who? But that is what people will say, and I think it's hard to bring people along. I say just give the facts. And if they hear it more than a few times, I think somebody's actually proven you have to hear something a certain number of times before you change your mind. And I think it's important for us to speak these truths. There are some people who are open to hearing new things, and your whole life to be told about Jacksonian democracy and what he did and see his face on the $20 bill. It's hard for people to hear something different, but hopefully he could, if he hears it a few more times, maybe he'll be willing to listen. But this is why it's important for us to be in solidarity with other people. We need to be with our people. Sometimes I go to conferences and things, and I'm like, I need to be with people who can hear me and who know what I'm talking about, who are on the same page. And we can, and we have to, of course, bring in new folks, and when we can do that. But I think it's both. We've got to speak out, and we've got to act with other people. I
agree. All right, well, thank you so much. I know you've got stuff to do on your Saturday here. I do. But I'll have you on again, and we'll begin talking about Russiagate.
Sure, I would love to.
That's to be one.